And everyone's quite afraid of experimentation, which I find kind of funny. But they're afraid to try things because it's like the whole world is going to fall down. And I'm like, look, unless you are a doctor, like you're actually directly an EMT, a paramedic, like involved in life and death things, it doesn't really matter. Like, what are we measuring here? So I do think that women are positioned uniquely, provided that they can tune into their own, ways of being, are positioned to create a more humane way of doing business.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Katherine Lazaruk. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Katherine, let me see. What is the one thing that makes you giggle like a lunatic?
Oh, one thing? One thing?
Okay, you can have a couple.
A few things. I delight in silly things. Like, I think sometimes my humor, I'm probably like a 5-year-old sometimes in my humor, because bodily noises will make me giggle like a lunatic. My husband doing a silly dance and shaking his butt at me or something will make me laugh my head off. Silly cat videos. Oh, he's so fun. I mean, we have a great time. Silly cat videos make me laugh like a lunatic. Yeah. Funny, silly things.
Excellent. So apart from fun, silly things, tell us a bit more about you.
Okay. Do you want the long version or I guess the short version? Because we're on a short podcast, right?
Sure. Let's start off with the short version.
Short version. Well, I can tell you a little bit about of course, we're here today to talk about professional things, like work things, and in the context of your maverickness. And I think about my journey a lot in terms of my work. And when I finished my degrees at university 1,000 years ago, I actually started out my careers in voice performance. So I sang in the opera professionally.
Wow.
And taught music in elementary school. So it was all music, like musically related things, but all in two very prescriptive careers. And the farther along I got in both of those careers, the less I liked them, because they both have quite narrow parameters. And I'm not a very good small box person. But it took me 12 years and a lung tumor to figure out that this was not the place for me or for my skills and gifts and talents. So even though I was good at those things, it didn't mean that I should be doing those things. So I took a step back, started working with a coach, reevaluated things. And 6 months after I left both of those careers, the tumor was gone. And I had a job doing corporate training at PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a large professional services firm. And during the time I was working with a coach, he basically said to me, what do you want to be when you grow up, little lady? He was kind of an alpha male dude. And so, and I mean, today I'd be like, don't talk to me like that. You're fired. However, back then I just thought it was funny. And so I laughed, and I had this bizarre vision, which was the first company name that I ever used and the first tagline. And it was ICU in a circle, Times New Roman font, silver lettering, purple background, the letters in a circle. And then underneath it said image consulting. And then the first tagline I ever used, which was intensive care for your image. So I had this company name. And then I started to laugh because I'm like, that's not a real job, like image consulting. Who does that? And he said, that's a real job and you could do that job. And so I started, at the time, there's no regulation in this industry at all. So you could hang your shingle out tomorrow and say I'm an image consultant and nobody would blink. It's unregulated. So at the time I'm like, well, I look all right. And I've read some books. So I guess I'll get a website and some business cards and start practicing. So that's what I did. And I don't recommend that approach to anybody now. Like, if you want to be an image consulting, please get some training, because it is a very psychological thing to be working with somebody's image. And it's very important to be gentle. So it's good to have some training behind you before you jump into it. However, I didn't know any better. So that's what I did. And when I lost my corporate job in the recession in 2009, I thought, okay, well, this is a great time to go full time in image consulting. And so I went and got my certifications in image and advanced image in Toronto, Canada, here. And I worked with the woman. She liked me, so I interned at her company. And then she made me her Western Canada image trainer because of my training background. So in addition to my private practice, I was working training consultants on how to be consultants at the same time that I was learning how to do it myself. And then as my clients got further up the chain in their companies, they said, we want you to come work with our teams, but we're really tired of explaining to the people who write the checks that you're not really an image consultant, that you're doing much more than that, and you're doing things very differently. So we need you to change your business so that it's not ICU image consulting, it's something else. And I said, okay, great. So I just changed to Lazaruk Consulting, and now I can do what I like. I'm not bound by any sort of optics or anything. And I'm not bound by the trends. I can just do what I like for the rest of my life. So that's how I got here. And now my practice is largely focused on women and advancing women to senior leadership faster, because I really would love to see gender parity in my lifetime. And I firmly believe that our structures are inhumane and we need to change them. And I think that women are uniquely positioned to do that.
That's fascinating. One, you can tell a good story. So I was definitely smiling while you was talking and having and sort of keeping in the odd little giggle there. And I love the fact that what I find amusing is someone saying, yeah, you need to change your business to suit us, and you go, yeah, okay, that sounds fine.
It made
me
sense.
Laugh, actually.
Yeah, it made sense. It was like, yeah, I don't like to be limited. If this is limiting me, then I'll change it.
It's perfect. That's a really perfect thing there. So tell me more about what you were saying about women being the way forward. What do you mean exactly by that?
Well, I think that it's interesting because I'm writing a new book. So I've actually just finished it and I'm just submitting it to the publisher to go through the publishing process on Monday. And over the years, what I've come to realize is that because I've always been an outlier, even in my corporate work, the thing that drove me the most crazy about it was the siloed nature of it. And how, like, I'm doing learning and development. So I feel that it would be useful to talk to other people in the company, other departments, to find out what they need. And yet that behavior was discouraged, which I found kind of ridiculous because of it's the hierarchical nature of business. And our leadership model is changing. So, we're coming out of a place of leadership being hierarchical, compartmentalized, and authoritative, like relying on authority to get things done. And we're moving into a leadership model that is integrated. So the model itself is integrated, but people are integrated, more relational. So it's based on relationships and not on authority as much. And whole, like we want to bring our whole selves to work. We want to be recognized for our gifts and skills and talents. We want to make sure that our gifts and skills and talents are being applied in the correct place and in the correct way at the correct time. And the issue is that as people want to be more human, essentially, at work, the leadership that's in place isn't really equipped to deal with it. Because they've been successful in the model that is produce all the time, suck it up. What stays at work, stays at work. What stays at home, stays at home. Don't bring that stuff to the office. And now we have people that are being human and feeling creatures and emotion. We have emotional lives. We have full lives outside of work. And we don't want work to be our only thing. And we show up with our whole selves and people are like, oh yeah, bring your whole selves to work. And we show up and then the leadership is like, oh, not like that.
That's a bit messy.
That's messy, right? And so the thing that I find, so in this book, I'm actually exploring the themes of kind of what's beyond professional presence or executive presence, because for such a long time, executive presence has really been a series of rules you need to follow in order to fit the dominant paradigm to be successful.
Okay. Let's stop you there, first of all. Sure. And then we'll break it down. So which rules then did it apply back then?
So for example, and the tricks will still work because the system is still largely in place. We haven't changed it quite yet, even though it is changing. But so for example, one of the things would be even if you want to, if you want to be slightly different as a leader, you still need to appear confident. You have to seem decisive. You have to have gravitas, right? You have to have dignity. This is how you must show up. And the most hilarious thing is that all the books that are written about executive presence, so as I was researching this book, all the books that are being written now by quote unquote the experts are the same books that were being written 20 years ago, just slightly repackaged with different information. And they still are not understanding that there's been a fundamental shift in the way that people want to be in the world. So this whole book is about exploring what's beyond executive presence, like what's next. So that's interesting. But the rules are things like you have to wear these things to be successful. You have to speak this way to be successful. So for example, if you're a woman in leadership and let's say you happen to have a higher pitched voice, people will disregard what you have to say and not see you as credible. So you have to have this rule, of changing yourself and changing the way that you fit to fit into a paradigm which is created for men and by men. Low, slow, strong, authoritative, decisive.
Do you think that's the same with names? So, when they say that, I don't know, Tiffany can't be CEO, a CEO.
Yeah, I think that's part of it.
But Elizabeth can, like that.
I think it's part of that. Because the whole thing is what's happening is before, in order to be successful, people needed to fit in the sandbox. And so then diversity, equity, and inclusion came along. And companies are like, hey, come and play in our sandbox. Our sandbox is great. We want diverse voices at the table. But they didn't want to change the table at all so the diverse voices would leave because they're like, we don't belong here. And for many years, people will be like, well, just suck it up. You have to play by the rules to be in our sandbox. And what they're not understanding is it doesn't work like that. The sandbox fundamentally has to change, which means the leadership has to change. And there are some old white guys that are doing a pretty good, like they're trying, right? They're trying to stay relevant. They're trying to understand, even though it's a huge amount of cognitive dissonance that they're experiencing right now. Like the poor guys, like they are messed up because they don't know what to do. And they have always known what to do. And they've always been successful. And now they aren't, and they don't, and it's not good. So when I say I'm focusing on women in leadership, that's where I think, because, and not all, obviously, there are women who have had to fit in and are so ingrained in the old system that they also are having the same kind of cognitive dissonance right now. But there are younger generations, sort of like that middle management core of women that feel differently, that would lead differently were they given the opportunity to actually try something different at those upper layers. And everyone's quite afraid of experimentation, which I find kind of funny. But they're afraid to try things because it's like the whole world is going to fall down. And I'm like, look, unless you are a doctor, like you're actually directly an EMT, a paramedic, like involved in life and death things, it doesn't really matter. Right? If you finish this project in this quarter or the next quarter, if the shareholder value drops a little bit, so some dude won't be able to go buy his second house. Like, really? Like, what are we measuring here? So I do think that women are positioned uniquely, provided that they can tune into their own, ways of being, are positioned to create a more humane way of doing business. And there are plenty of men who are very balanced as well. But I think it's this balance of sort of masculine, feminine energy. And wherever you are on that spectrum, if you're non-binary or, you're a little more this or a little more that, whatever it is, but in the world, we need to have a place of less division. It's not black and white. We don't live in an either or world. We live in an and world. The sooner that we realize that we need balances of both, whatever body you're presenting in or whatever gender you're presenting in is kind of irrelevant. It's more like, what are the qualities you're bringing to the table? But I would argue that we don't have enough feminine energy at the table. So that's why I'm focused on bringing those women into leadership. So I think it's going to change the game.
Thank you. So when you're saying beyond professional presence, what you're actually saying is beyond a stereotypical white male perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. We need to get beyond it. It's not working out very well for us. The world's on fire. It's kind of a problem.
Yeah. Let's listen to a quick advert.
The Maverick Paradox. Judith Germain is an author, speaker, consultant, mentor, and trainer, and the leading authority on Maverick leadership. She is the founder of the Maverick Paradox, which supports organizations to enhance their leadership capabilities and to help business owners develop and grow their businesses. Judith enables individuals, business owners, and organizations to improve their impact and influence. She is also HR Zone's leadership columnist, and her expert opinion has appeared in national, international, and trade press.
Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious. So presence then, in what you're saying, is more than kind of having to speak in a alpha male way, having to dress in a stereotypical corporate way.
Yes.
Which is interesting because, yes, I can see how that can be seen as presence. But when I think about executive presence, I'm thinking about, do I notice that person in the room or do they somehow become the wallpaper?
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking more about how they show up, not necessarily what they're wearing or their depth of their voice. But I don't know if that's just my maverick perspective, because sometimes you see, when you see people,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have to even be the leader, but they just draw you to them. And there's
Yes.
other people who could be the boss, and it's like
Yeah.
they just completely disappear. You just don't even see them, even when they're in the front of the room.
Right. And yes, 100%, you're on the right track. And that's actually completely true, is that the presence piece is how you show up.
Right.
And the reason that I spoke first about sort of what you wear and how you speak is because those are components. Those are tactical things you can do to create a stronger presence. But ultimately, those things that executive presence experts have been touting for a long time are a facade. Those are things you might put on like a costume to create executive presence, but it isn't really presence. It isn't really you knowing yourself. So if I think about presence, when I work with my clients with it, I have 3 C's of strong, beautiful being. And the first one is character. And that is the place where you have to know yourself incredibly well. Who you are when nobody's looking, right? You know yourself very, very well. The second piece of that is congruence. So how congruent is your external expression with your internal life? And what I mean by that is, so if you are someone who is, let's just take a really easy example. So let's say you're a Reiki practitioner, you're very interested in energy, you're a healer, you're in sync with your cycles, you really, really love the movement of the world, and you pay attention to that kind of stuff. If you are dressing or showing up in the world in a 3-piece suit, that does not make sense. And when you meet people, they know that you don't make sense. People like people to make sense.
Yeah.
Right. So the congruence piece means that whoever you are internally needs to show up externally so that you're better able to connect with other people in the world. So you're connected with yourself, and then you get connected with other people. So characters first, know yourself. Congruence, make sure that your internal and external worlds are aligned. And then the last C is choice. And I used to talk about the last C being control, because you can exert a stunning amount of control over how you are perceived by what you choose to do. But I've since altered my perspective on that. And now I call it choice, because once you know who you are and you know how to be congruent, then you get to choose how much of that do you want to share with the world? In what way do you want to fit in, not fit in? Do you want to be perceived or not perceived? Because sometimes, to your point earlier, it's useful to be someone who fades into the background. if you really want to listen or you want to observe something. And sometimes it's useful to be the person who is noticed in a room, trying to get a point across, make your mark.
That's
Right.
so interesting. The reason I think that's interesting is because now I'm just externally processing here. I would
Mm.
have thought leadership presence, if you have it, you have it in all areas. I just
Yeah.
gone.
Sorry, continue, please. Go ahead.
I've just sort of think. I mean, because it makes me think. Like, I remember being younger, for
Mhm.
example, and like in a circle of friends, and everybody goes like, where are we going to go? Where are we going to go out? And you don't say
Okay.
anything, and you're just waiting for somebody to decide because you just can't be bothered. And everyone
Mhm.
looks at you and go, well, where are we going? You're like, I don't want, I don't want to decide. Um, it's it's almost like if you have presence, you're noticed whether you want to or not. Even, do you know what I mean? It's almost like you can't slink into the background because the presence is too bright. Even, do you know what I mean? Am I just
Hmm.
being silly? Do you understand what I mean?
No, not at all. I think you're pulling on a thread
Right.
of what is nature versus what is nurture.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
In the sense of, if you are born with a natural sense of who you are,
Mm.
people are going to notice you, right? There's a natural sense of that. And you also can cultivate the degree to which you are noticed.
Mm-hmm.
I think of it like a piece of stereo equipment. You're the same piece of equipment. You can turn the volume up or you can turn the volume down.
But
You have a
never off
choice.
though.
No, I
I
hope
don't
not,
think.
because then you would die.
No, do you know what I mean? I just don't think. I think you could turn it. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm even arguing with you, but I'm just thinking. I'm just thinking that leadership presence, how I see it, I guess, is
Yeah.
something that never dulls. You can choose not to amplify it, like you can choose
Yeah.
not to step out and go da-da, but
Hmm.
it'll always be there and be noticeable.
Right. Yes, I agree with you. Because who you are at 4 is who you are at 104. The
Mm.
core of you is never going to change. And it shouldn't change, because whatever you're brought to this planet with is the perfect thing for you to do whatever it is you're meant to do on the planet. So your core is the what you're talking about is the essence of somebody. Because you can go into a room of kindergarten children and you can
Mm.
see who naturally wants to be in charge, who people gravitate to. But then the question is, why do they gravitate towards them? Right? Do they gravitate towards that person because that person has historically made a bunch of decisions? Do they gravitate towards that person because of their height? And like our biology is conditioned to look at taller people as leaders. Right?
Mm.
So this is what I mean when I look at this, the choice part of it. The choice is, what are you going to do with what you have? So if you, for example, are someone who is always noticed in a room, what are you going to do with that noticing? Are you going to take that noticing and extend it to leadership opportunities for other people in the room? Are you going to take the reins and be the front of the boat, like the bow, snowplow going through being a front, leading from the front? Are you going to be someone who's going to take somebody alongside you? You can choose what you want to do with that. And for
Yeah.
people that would like to be leaders, but aren't sure how, my argument is to go back to those 3 C's. Go to the character first. Know yourself, because it's not that, let's say you're not the first person that's noticed in a room, but you might have some great ideas. So then how do you exert that influence in alignment with your nature?
See, I agree with that, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
still having some dissonance. So I'm just trying to process what I'm
Mm,
feeling.
I
Because
love it. It's
because
dissonance is
I'm
great.
yeah, and I'm just going, yeah, I agree, but still, and I'm just
Mm,
trying to find out what's making me go, because
yeah.
I think
Okay.
because it feels to me like there's some nuance there that I can't quite get my hand on. Because I'm thinking
Oh,
that because part of what you're saying is about stepping up and taking that leadership mantle. And I'm also recognizing, seeing people, children and adults, who I would say they've got great leadership presence and they are choosing not to lead, yet they still have that presence even when they are choosing not to use it. So it's making me think that leadership presence, you do or you don't have it. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't gain it, because you can, but you if you have it, you have it. And that's distinct from choosing to use it. I think there's like another bit that you're talking about that I'm distinguishing from leadership presence, but I can't name it because I don't know how to describe what I mean. Am I making any sense at all?
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, there's loads of nuance, and we're on a short podcast, so a short amount of time to put it into perspective. But what I think I hear, let me just frame what I think you're saying.
Yeah.
What I think you're saying is you either have it or you don't. Is that correct?
Yeah. But you, okay. I don't necessarily think you're born with it per se. Some are, but you can still learn to have it.
Okay. So yes, I think some people are born with this innate noticeable nature. Some people grow into their innate noticeable nature. Some people don't wish to grow into it. And some people don't, they're like supporting characters. And they love that role.
Yep.
And in all of those places, there is an element of leadership. And in all of those places, I'm arguing that it's more than presence, it's about being.
Yes.
It's being who you are and doing what you do and being 100% okay with all of it.
Okay, so what I'm getting now is that what you're saying is you have leadership presence, and the being aspect is when you decide to actively step into it.
Right. I think. I'm wondering if you're talking about degrees.
This is an interesting conversation, by the way. At least I think so.
Good. I'm glad. I love interesting conversations. And my whole, it's funny because my husband gave me a theme song years ago, and it's called Uncomfortable by Hailstorm. It's a hard rock band, but it's basically like the chorus is, I'm going to make you uncomfortable. Like maybe not unpleasantly uncomfortable, but a little uncomfortable.
You're definitely a maverick. Like, that's why.
What is this? Right? Thanks. It's like, what is this? Because I've struggled from the beginning of my career in image consulting with this whole idea of the facade, the superficial.
Yes, that's no good.
Putting it on in order to do something, putting on a costume.
Yeah.
Or my worth is in my external production in the world. Like I have struggled with that for a long time. So I like having these kind of conversations because it does help people articulate who they are and what they want to do. And that's ultimately the goal of my work, is looking at people and saying, who are you? What do you want to do in the world? How do you come to some place of acceptance with that and move forward?
You know what's so interesting? Today I was mentoring someone, and I had that first 2 points, which is what you need to do is figure out who you are.
Great.
And what do you want to be known for? And we were talking about leadership presence, funny enough, but that was exactly what I was saying, is that it starts from there, because you need to know self. And if you don't know self, then how can you project it to others if you don't know what it is?
Yeah, because you can't communicate something to somebody if you don't know what it is. So for example, like if someone asks me, they're like, well, what's your leadership? What's your brand, or what's your leadership style? Whatever. I say I'm firm, fair, fierce. And they're like, oh, okay, what's that? Firm means I stand up for what I believe in and I'm willing to speak on it. Fair means if I get new information, I'm totally open to changing my opinion on something. Because if you don't change your opinion, you're not growing. Fundamentally. So fair, I'm willing to take in new information, change if necessary. And fierce means like fierce. I want to show up like, I'm ready for life. I'll get into a dog.
You're ready for bear, as our American cousins would say.
Yeah, right. Like I enjoy life. I'm fierce about it. I want to soak as much experience out of this go round that I possibly can. I want to play. I want to have fun. I want to cry. I want to laugh. I want to be in despair. I want to be ridiculously optimistic. I want all of it. So I'm very fierce with what I do. And then if people say, well, say more about that, I will sometimes say I'm fun, because I love to have fun. I'm fecund, which is a great word, like fertile and, earthy and lots of ideas, and fabulous.
You love your alliteration, don't you?
Right? I do. And also when I work with clients, their words might be something totally different. They're not always alliterative. It just happens to be that I like F words. And so here I am. But I know those things about myself. So then when I go to communicate that to people, or I look at my work that I'm doing, I can tell people, be like, look, I'm not for everybody. Here's kind of how you need to be. Here's what you need to know about me if you want to work with me. One of my clients, she said to me, she goes, I love the way you kick me in the ass and pat me on the head at the same time. I'm like, because I love you, right? I want you to do well. I want you to be who you are. But that's just an example. And so if you are not very clear about who you really are, and who you are when nobody's looking too, because particularly women get into the trap of following into everybody else's expectations. And so they get a bit confused when someone says to them, well, what do you like? Or what do you want? They're like, I don't even know. And that's the problem. So how can you get anywhere if you don't know?
So I'm curious now. So I'm just going to cycle back to the beginning of the conversation where you were saying leadership presence is like, the deep voice, the tall man, this is the way it is kind of demeaning. But there's lots of people who aren't that.
Exactly.
Would you say that, but you wouldn't argue that they didn't have presence? Or are you arguing more that the concept of professional presence is wrong?
It's flawed. It's not complete, is what I'm saying. We are getting a limited view of what leadership is based on the past information that we have about who's leading and who's creating the structures. So a lot of it is about broadening our perspective on what leadership looks, feels, sounds like.
Okay, that I can go with. I write in my book that socialized mavericks, when they are male, can find it quite difficult because it's very different to the supposedly male form of leading. So because they'll be more quietly confident, more likely to be empathetic, more likely to be vulnerable and okay with that. So they will struggle more in a traditional environment.
Yeah, I just spoke to somebody that wants to do a mid-career pivot yesterday. He was talking about coming into this executive coaching field. And we were talking about the way he goes, all my personality tests and things I don't really fit into the corporate world, but I've been in the corporate world for a really long time and I'm struggling. And I think that's one of the things that where the system that we're currently in does a disservice to all of us, because even if someone is outwardly successful, inwardly they are quietly miserable.
Oh, that sounds horrible.
It is horrible. It is. There's I would say, half of the very successful people that I meet are inwardly deeply unhappy. And it's so heartbreaking because they've achieved this so this is what I talk about when I'm looking at the whole of this is, what are we measuring as success, and how do you define success on your own terms, and what's really going to make you happy and what's really going to be satisfying for the world, right? Because, for example, success, like if you want to look at the global perspective, what looks like success in the first world, in the developed countries, is at the cost of horrible atrocities in other countries. The stealing of resources, keeping people in poverty, that's not balanced, right? So when people say, oh, we can grow continuously, no, you can't. Nothing in nature does that. You don't see the stalks of corn in the field growing 24/7. They don't. They grow, they are harvested, the stalks wither, the field lies fallow, you plant again, they grow again. right? Nothing in nature does this continuous growth except cancer, right? So I think the paradigm is really flawed, and that is what needs to change. And I think that's what people who are successful in the current paradigm are really struggling with. But if we don't fix it, we're already in trouble. And it's just going to get worse if we don't take a deep look at our humanity and how we can balance ourselves better in the world.
Yeah, there's no arguing with that. With that insight.
And it starts with us, right? Like if you look at the state of the world and you don't like it, you know what? Get right with yourself. And that's the first place to start, because society society's not something outside of us. It is us. We decide. So if we decide, then why don't we decide to make something better?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Before we end then, just one more question. So we talked about women and how they do leadership presence differently to the, I don't know, the 20th century version. How does that work with non-white women?
Intersectionality. It's a beautiful thing and a horrible thing all at the same time. Are you talking about how? So I think what I think is really important is to see diverse representation of all different colors of people, all different races, all different styles. When you say how does it work, what do you mean? Do you mean like are women of color penalized for stepping out because that happens? What do you mean specifically? Well, how does it work?
I'm thinking that obviously women generally are going to show up differently from men, and that in itself can cause some positives and some negatives.
Yeah.
But non-white women show up quite differently than white women, and then have an additional penalty on both. So I'm wondering, from your perspective and the people that you've coached and mentored, how do Black women and other non-white women demonstrate their leadership presence in a way that can be seen as acceptable?
I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. So there's a choice, right? In that last C, there's a choice to be made. If you're a non-white person, do you want to choose to show up as your true self? Like even something as simple as wearing braids in a professional environment or an afro in a professional environment, for example, just as a very, very high level example. You choose, do I want to be someone who's going to step slightly outside the box and show up as a representation of something different in leadership? Or do I want to conform a bit so that I can start to talk to people one-on-one in my company and start to shift the perceptions of leadership as I go? I think a good example of this is Michelle Obama. So when Michelle Obama was First Lady, if you look at the way she showed up publicly then versus the way she's showing up publicly now, it's different. Her constraints are different. So I think for non-white women, you really need to think about who you are as a person, think about how much risk you want to take, and then think about what's the context that you're operating in. Are you operating in a context where it's safe for you to be more expressive? And then you can go a little bit more into who you are as a person and show up differently. Or are you in a space that is not safe? And then it's going to require a different approach. More often than not, in the unsafe environments, it's a series of one-to-one conversations that are held repeatedly over time. And that takes a great deal of endurance. And it can be really tiresome. So I think it's that choice. It's how much do you want to stand out? How much risk can you take or not? And then how do you want to navigate that in your leadership?
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
And I agree with what you're saying, but I'm also recognizing that for some people that sometimes there is effectively no choice.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of like in America with the Crown Act, and
I know.
you could be
Crazy.
dismissed for wearing your hair the way that it comes out of your
Yeah.
head, for example, sounds bizarre.
Oh, it's
Um,
nuts, isn't it? It's like that you have to make a law somewhere
but
to
that
make
sort of
wearing your own hair
individual,
okay.
um,
Sorry?
I was saying, but for those individuals caught up with it, they either come to work wearing a hairstyle that actually can ruin their health, to fit in, or not have any money. So effectively,
Right.
in that thing, there is no choice. And you could look at the other way. Michelle Obama's a really good example,
Hmm.
because she said that it was hard enough for America to accept a black um, wife of the president, let alone
Hmm.
one who had Afro hair. So
Well,
she felt
exactly.
like she thought it was
Yeah.
too much
Hmm.
for
It's too
people to
confrontational.
accept. So
Yeah.
the argument there would probably, yes, she had a choice, but did she really have a choice?
Yeah, no, I agree. There are some places where you have no choice. And I think from
Mm,
my work, so it's interesting because I had this conversation with one of my colleagues who I really love, and we were talking about diversity in the image consulting world
mm,
because it's not, it's really a lot of the standards for professional appearance are based on white normativity, right?
mhm,
And so we were having this conversation, and I said to her, I said, it's interesting because my practice, my clientele is white for the most part. And I said, I
mhm.
really think maybe I should be like, that's not good. Is that bad that I have strictly white clientele? And she goes, oh no. She goes, we need you to talk to those white women because I'm tired of talking to them. So she's like, before they get to me, they need to talk to you so that you have, some voice in their ear about changing their perspective on what leadership looks like. Because she said, if you're not having those, I can't have those conversations because it's too confrontational. She said, but if you're having those conversations, then they'll be ready for the next stage of allowing other people into the room. So I think in practice, it is awful that people do not have a choice. And people are like, it's everywhere, even with like economics. People are like, oh, they made the choice to be unhoused. And I'm like, do they have a choice really? Like, because if you just have two crappy choices, that's not a choice.
Yeah. We've had
So when I'm in
something similar.
yeah, like when I talk to people about conversations like that, I'm like, you have choices because you're from a place of privilege. You have choices, but people don't have choices. So I think another really important piece of the leadership conversation is if you are in the system and if you are at those tables, you have a responsibility to be having those conversations, to open the doors for people that don't have good choices.
Yeah. And I suppose the imperative is, if you don't, you will not survive. And what I mean by that is that we need we need diverse voices and complete diversity, cognitive diversity, all sorts of diversity, not specifically color, because
Right.
without that, you can't survive. It's like the animal kingdom, isn't it? If there is no
Mm-hmm.
diversity, one illness will kill everything.
Exactly.
They
Right.
only survive because there's a different gene pool, there's a different
Mm-hmm.
survival
Mm-hmm.
on basis to do that. And we know from the research that true diversity makes smarter, more innovative, more consumer focused organizations. And
Of
that's
course.
what we need now.
Right. Because if you do not really have diversity at your tables, at your leadership tables, you are operating with incomplete information.
Yeah.
That's why diverse organizations thrive. It's because they have a broad perspective.
Hmm.
And so that's the importance of it. So if anyone's trying to make an economic case, I mean, there's so much research around the economics of it. It's sort of like, I always feel like the economy will take care of itself. If we take care of each other, take care of ourselves, take care of each other, the economy takes care of itself.
Mm.
But people are not quite there yet. So it's up to people like you and me to be out there spreading the word, people who are listening to this podcast. It's up to you, it's up to all of us to have these conversations one to one, start spreading the message, start collectively getting other people on board with, hey, we need some win-win situations for all of us because we can't keep operating in this win-lose game. It's just not working.
Yeah, and I suppose if we want an even more imperative, we need to recognise that Generation Z or Generation Z are the most diverse, open-minded generation that we have. And
That's fantastic.
whereas we could think we're working in a homogeneous environment, we don't know the makeup of the individuals in front of us or who they're with. So everybody might look the same, but they may well have partners from different groups, or they may have some sort of neurodiversity, or there's no, we're not really living in a society where those differences are hidden as they have been in the last few hundreds of years.
Yeah, exactly. We used to just put people in asylums, women in asylums. Your husband could lobotomize you if he didn't like what you said. Like, that's not good. Right. So now there, as some of us are getting free, other people are getting free as well.
Sounds
super
good.
Interesting. I know we could talk all night, I'm sure.
I was going to say, this is probably a good time to end, but you'll just have to come back.
And that sounds great. When my book is released, I'll come and tell you all about it.
Yeah, that sounds like a plan. That sounds like
Great.
a plan. Okay. Thank you for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where through conversations with our guests, just like Katherine, we demonstrate that Maverick leadership exists everywhere. I am Judith Germain, your host. I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox Magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.